Today's video is about a businessman who built a counterfeit clothing empire while siphoning tens of millions from the tax system, a county lines drug network that supplied thousands of users while believing the phones would never stop ringing, and a violent home invasion that targeted one of Britain's most recognizable sportsmen while his family slept upstairs. Different crimes, different people, but they were all exposed in the same way. What none of them realized was how early police attention had begun, how long evidence had been accumulating in the background. This is the story of organized crime, violence, and financial fraud, and the investigations that dismantled them, step by step, until there was nowhere left to hide. Welcome to UK Crime Documentaries. Let's get straight into the first case. To anyone looking in from the outside, Arif Patel appeared to be a straightforward businessman. Based in Preston, he presented himself as a textiles trader operating within a sector that relies heavily on international supply chains and bulk shipments. Import-export businesses dealing in fabric, yarn, and finished garments move goods constantly, often across multiple borders, and regularly deal with large sums of money. At the center of Patel's operation was Faisal Tex Limited, a company that outwardly appeared to be a legitimate import and export firm, operated from Fulwood in Preston. Invoices, shipping documents, and a VAT paperwork all gave the impression of a normal commercial enterprise functioning within UK trade systems. Patel's trading activity began around 2004, and from the outset it followed patterns that were common in the industry: importing goods, exporting consignments, and submitting VAT repayment claims linked to international transactions. Crucially, Faisal Tex blended seamlessly into the wider commercial environment. And for years, there was nothing on the surface to distinguish Patel's operation from countless other traders moving goods in and out of the country. But behind the appearance of ordinary commerce, the business was built on a fraud that relied almost entirely on paperwork. The fraud at the heart of Arif Patel's operation was known as Carousel VAT fraud, a scheme designed to exploit the way value-added tax is reclaimed on cross-border trade. In legitimate transactions, VAT is paid when goods are sold domestically and reclaimed when goods are exported. Carousel fraud twists that system by creating chains of companies that appear to buy and sell goods across borders, while the tax collected is never passed on to the authorities. In Patel's case, the chains were built around textiles and mobile phones, commodities that are easy to move on paper, high in value, and commonly traded across the UK and EU. At the center of the scheme was missing trader intra-community fraud. One company in the chain would import goods VAT-free from abroad, sell them domestically while charging VAT, and then disappear without paying that tax to HMRC. Meanwhile, another company, controlled by the same criminal network, would claim back VAT on supposed exports. In reality, the goods often never moved at all, or they moved only once, before being repeatedly resold on paper. The same consignments were recycled through multiple transactions, creating the illusion of high-volume international trade. Using this method, Patel's network submitted VAT repayment claims totaling approximately £97 million. These were not isolated claims. They were made repeatedly over time, backed by detailed invoices, shipping records, and accounting entries designed to withstand routine scrutiny. However, not all of the money was paid out. Through ongoing monitoring and investigation, HM Revenue and Customs blocked around £64 million of those claims before they could be released. Even so, tens of millions were still successfully extracted before the operation began to collapse. What made the scheme so effective was that it wasn't dependent on physical stock. It was driven by documents, invoices, customs declarations, and VAT returns, each one reinforcing the next in a closed loop of fabricated trade. On paper, everything added up. But the moment investigators stopped looking at individual transactions and started examining the pattern as a whole, the structure began to reveal itself. And once that happened, attention shifted away from spreadsheets. and towards what else the business was really bringing into the country. Running alongside the paper-based VAT fraud was a second, very real operation, one that involved physical goods moving through UK roads, ports and warehouses. While Faisaltex appeared to trade legitimately, Patel's network was also importing large volumes of counterfeit designer clothing. These weren't small consignments or isolated shipments. Investigators later calculated that, had the goods been genuine, they would have been worth at least £50 million at retail value. The counterfeit items closely imitated well-known global brands, including Calvin Klein, Nike, Lacoste, Levi's, Prada, Disney, and Armani. The scale and variety of labels suggested an established supply chain rather than opportunistic counterfeiting. One of the earliest and most significant breaks came in August 2005, when police officers stopped a van travelling on the A74/M74 near Confiscation in Dumfries and Galloway. Inside, officers discovered bulk quantities of fake designer clothing packed for distribution. The stop immediately changed the trajectory of the investigation. This was no longer just a financial crime hidden behind spreadsheets. There were now physical goods, transport routes, and handlers, evidence that could be seized, photographed, traced, and followed. As scrutiny intensified, shipping containers linked to the network were intercepted at major UK ports including Liverpool, Southampton, and Felixstowe. Each interception revealed the same pattern. One intercepted shipment was traced to a delivery destined for a wholesaler in Glasgow, exposing how the goods were intended to enter mainstream commercial distribution. With physical evidence now stacking up alongside financial data, investigators began to focus less on how the scheme worked and more on who was enabling it, moving the money and keeping it running behind the scenes. Patel's operation relied on a network of offshore companies and foreign bank accounts designed to break the paper trail between criminal income and its final destination. A key part of that structure involved companies registered in the British Virgin Islands, jurisdictions commonly used to obscure ownership and limit transparency. Money generated from fraudulent VAT claims and the sale of counterfeit goods was routed through these entities before being transferred again, often through free zone companies and banking facilities linked to the United Arab Emirates. Investigators later established that Dubai played a central role in this stage of the operation, not just as a financial hub, but as a place where key decisions were made. A central figure in that process was Mohammed Jafar Ali, who handled the movement and layering of funds through UAE-linked accounts and free zone companies. From Dubai, he acted as the conduit between offshore structures. From there, the funds began their journey back into the UK, not as direct transfers, but as cleaned money, distanced from its criminal origin through layers of transactions, corporate names, and overseas accounts. Once reintegrated, the money was used to purchase high-value assets, particularly property. Patel invested heavily in commercial and residential buildings across Preston, including premises on Fishergate, the city's main shopping street. Along with these residential properties were also acquired locally. Beyond Lancashire, further high-value properties in London were purchased, widening both the scale and complexity of asset ownership. The investments didn't stop in the UK. Investigators later identified overseas property and asset holdings linked to Patel in the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Morocco, and Turkey. These locations mirrored the financial routes used to launder the money, allowing wealth to be parked in jurisdictions beyond easy reach of UK enforcement. One particularly notable asset was a historic house in Hampstead, linked to Sir William Nicholson, the British painter and printmaker. The purchase of a culturally significant property reinforced how effectively criminal profits had been disguised as legitimate wealth. On the other hand, Patel's lifestyle also included luxury vehicles, most notably a Ferrari 575 Super America. After all this mounting evidence, restraint orders were imposed, freezing tens of millions of pounds worth of property and luxury assets. Homes, commercial buildings, vehicles and bank accounts were legally locked down, preventing anything from being sold, transferred, or concealed, while criminal proceedings continued. That month, Arif Patel left the UK for Dubai and did not return. Despite his absence, the case continued. Patel was formally charged and later tried in his absence at Chester Crown Court. He was convicted of conspiracy to cheat the public revenue, false accounting, money laundering, and selling counterfeit goods. Another central figure, Mohammed Jafar Ali, initially appeared before the court. Midway through proceedings, he absconded, triggering the issuance of an arrest warrant as the trial continued without him. Between 2011 and 2023, the case was broken down into multiple court proceedings, each focused on specific strands of the conspiracy: VAT fraud, counterfeit goods, false accounting, and money laundering. This approach allowed prosecutors to manage the sheer scale of evidence and the number of defendants involved. In total, between 24 and 26 individuals connected to the network were convicted. Combined prison sentences amounted to between 116 and 147 years, reflecting the cumulative harm caused by the fraud rather than any single offense. Two chartered accountants from a Preston-based firm, Anil Hindocha and Yogesh Patel, were convicted of sustaining the fraud through false accounting and laundering mechanisms. Hindocha received a 12-year, 10-month sentence, while Yogesh Patel was jailed for 5 years and 7 months, a clear signal that professional status would not insulate anyone from liability. With this investigation concluded, attention turns to a very different case, one that unfolded far from boardrooms and balance sheets. What police uncovered was not a single county line operation, but two parallel drug lines feeding the same market. The first was the KAM line, run by Syed Kamrul Alam. Alam controlled the phone line, set prices, and directed supply from the West Midlands into Worcestershire. Investigators established that he oversaw the operation from a distance, avoiding direct contact with customers while issuing instructions to those working below him. We will discuss this in a few minutes. Running in parallel was the H line, led by Amit Mudhar, based in Malvern. Mudhar managed his own drugs phone, controlled distribution into South Worcestershire, and directed the individuals responsible for day-to-day dealing. Evidence showed he exercised firm control, ensuring the line remained operational even when pressure began to mount elsewhere. Mudhar was supported by a close group of trusted associates. One of those individuals was Sark Kennedy, a figure whose involvement drew particular attention. Kennedy, the son of internationally known violinist Nigel Kennedy, was identified as one of Shimith Mudhar's trusted right-hand men within the H-line. Kennedy had already received a 33-month prison sentence for earlier offences connected to drug dealing. Despite that, he returned to the operation and re-offended. Ricardo White and Genti Aliaj were also identified as his right-hand men, helping manage supply, enforce discipline, and coordinate the flow of drugs into the target areas. Beneath them sat the street-level workforce. Individuals including Naringa Rupaitate, Brandon Scott, Mark Tyrrell, Jack Beddoes, Katie Holland, and Robert Fleetwood handled the physical work, packaging drugs, delivering orders, and collecting cash under instruction from above. Both lines were supplied from Birmingham and the wider West Midlands, with cocaine transported into Worcester and Malvern, towns identified by police as stable and profitable markets. Broadcast messages advertised availability, and runners were dispatched to meet users directly. What appeared to be resilience was, in fact, exposure. Because once investigators understood how closely the two lines were linked, dismantling one inevitably led them to the other. The KAM line operated between January 2018 and December 2020, forming one half of a wider county lines network. The line was led by Syed Kamrul Alam. What we have already discussed, Alam's right-hand man was Shakir Ali, described by police as his lieutenant. Ali assisted in coordinating supply and movement and was present with Alam during attempts to evade arrest. We will talk about him in a few minutes. Supporting them were additional members of the KAM line. Mohammed Amirul Islam was involved in the supply and onward distribution of cocaine. acting as part of the network responsible for moving drugs from source to street-level dealers. Andre Passaro operated primarily in Worcester, where he played a role in local distribution, handling deliveries and customer contact within the town. Syed Daida Ahmed assisted with distribution, supporting the movement of drugs and money under instruction from those controlling the line. Duncan Lawson was linked to local dealing in Malvern, where he formed part of the street-level operation supplying cocaine to users in the area. Investigators estimated the KAM line supplied in excess of 14 to 15 kilograms of cocaine, reaching hundreds and potentially thousands of users across Worcester and Malvern. With the KAM line dismantled, the network did not disappear. Control of drug supply into Worcestershire shifted, and attention moved fully onto the H line, which continued operating until it too was brought down. The investigation shifted decisively in early 2020, when West Mercia Police received intelligence. Officers soon identified the hallmark of a county lines operation: mass broadcast messages. Phones linked to the network were sending repeated texts advertising cocaine, prices, and availability, inviting users to place orders. The volume and regularity of the messages made clear this was not casual dealing, but a coordinated system operating at scale. Responsibility for the investigation sat with West Mercia Police Serious and Organised Crime Unit. Rather than moving immediately on those believed to be in charge, detectives adopted a deliberate strategy, targeting street-level dealers first. The aim was simple: seize phones, extract data, and allow the network to reveal itself from the bottom up. As arrests were made, that approach began to pay off. Mobile phones recovered from runners and local dealers contained contact lists, message histories, and call data linking them directly to the drugs lines. Each handset added another layer to the picture, showing how instructions were issued, where drugs were stored, and who was giving orders. Alongside the phone data, police were also building a visual record of the operation. Surveillance teams documented key moments in real time, capturing photographs used later in court and released through media briefings. These images showed members of the network meeting in public places, cash handovers taking place. Officers observed patterns: who arrived first, who stayed longest, and who never touched drugs but always left with money. By focusing, the Serious and Organised Crime Unit had quietly dismantled the anonymity the gang relied on. And with that groundwork complete, the investigation moved into its next phase. The investigation reached a critical moment when officers attempted to stop a vehicle linked directly to the KAM line. Inside the car were Syed Kamrul Alam and his lieutenant, Shakir Ali. Police moved in to intercept the vehicle, but instead of stopping, Ali accelerated. As officers closed in, the car was deliberately rammed into a police vehicle, an act that immediately escalated the encounter from surveillance to serious risk. During the pursuit, one doorbell footage revealed packages of cocaine being thrown from the window. The drugs were discarded as the car continued to flee, a clear attempt to destroy evidence while evading arrest. The chase ended abruptly when the vehicle was abandoned in a pub car park. Alam and Ali fled on foot, leaving the car behind. What was the most shocking detail of this whole incident was the vehicle narrowly missed a small child. In the chaos of the escape, a moment later, highlighted by police as underlining just how dangerous the attempt to evade arrest had become. Recovered from the scene were the discarded wraps of cocaine and other key evidence. What had been a covert operation was now overt. And with the pursuit over and evidence recovered, police were no longer building a picture of the network. They were preparing to dismantle it. In December 2020, Syed Kamrul Alam was arrested at his address on Highfield Road in Rowley Regis. He was charged, remanded in custody, and removed from the operation entirely. For the network, that arrest created a sudden vacuum. Almost immediately, attention shifted to the other half of the operation. Amit Mudhar, phone evidence later showed him mocking Alam, claiming he was 10 steps ahead of the investigation. Shortly after Alam's arrest, Mudhar left the UK and flew to Dubai. Despite his departure, the supply into Worcestershire did not stop. The H-Line continued operating. In April 2021, Mudhar returned to the UK, apparently believing he had avoided serious consequences. That belief did not last long. Within weeks of his return, police arrested one of Mudhar's associates, a move that quickly led to a significant seizure. Officers recovered approximately £15,000 worth of cocaine. And with fresh seizures, fresh arrests, and months of intelligence already in hand, police were now positioned to move decisively against the remaining members of the network. Across multiple arrests and searches, officers seized around 750 grams of cocaine, alongside more than 2 kilograms of cannabis, valued at over £80,000. One of the most telling discoveries came when more than 400 individual wraps of drugs were found hidden inside disposable gloves, a method used to conceal street-ready deals while allowing rapid distribution. These seizures were not isolated finds, each one tied directly back to phone data, movements, and individuals already identified within the network. With the evidence complete and seizures logged, the case moved into its final phase, the courtroom. With the investigations complete and the networks fully exposed, the final reckoning came in court. In 2023 and 2024, 16 defendants connected to the KAM and H County lines were sentenced at Worcester Crown Court. Several key defendants entered guilty pleas, which directly affected their sentences. Alom himself originally received a 15-year sentence, which was later reduced to 10 years due to his early guilty plea. His close associate, Shakir Ali, was sentenced to 11.5 years, also reduced to 10 years after pleading guilty at the first opportunity. Another key figure, Mohammed Amirul Islam, was handed 9.5 years, reduced to 8.5 years for his early plea. Amit Mudhar from Malvern was convicted after trial and sentenced to 14 years and 6 months imprisonment for conspiracy to supply Class A drugs. Genti Aliaj from Quinton in Birmingham was sentenced to 8 years in prison. Ricardo White from Elmdon in Solihull received a sentence of 7 years imprisonment. Mark Tyrrell from Malvern was jailed for 8 years. Lower down the hierarchy, Sark Kennedy, also from Malvern, was sentenced to 3 years imprisonment. Among the street-level dealers and facilitators, Naringa Rupikate from West Bromwich received 6 years in prison. Brandon Scott from Worcester was sentenced to 6 years, with a further 3 years imposed consecutively for unrelated offences. Jack Beddoes from Worcester was jailed for 3 years and 4 months, while Katie Holland from Malvern received a 4-year prison sentence. The final defendant, Robert Fleetwood from Worcester, was sentenced to 4 years imprisonment, with an additional 3 months added for contempt of court after directing abuse at officers, court staff, and the sentencing judge. With the county lines network dismantled and the courts delivering their final verdicts, one operation was over, but it wasn't the last. The attack unfolded in the early hours of 27th of November 2021 at around 2:30 a.m. inside a detached family home in Ongar, Essex. Upstairs, Mark Cavendish was asleep with his wife, Peter, and their young child. Cavendish was not fully fit. The court later heard he had only recently been discharged from hospital and was still recovering from broken ribs and a punctured lung sustained in a cycling crash days earlier. Downstairs, the night was already unraveling. A patio door was smashed, sending glass across the floor as balaclava-clad intruders forced entry. Investigators later established that between 3 and 5 offenders were involved in the raid. Among those responsible were Romario Henry and Ali Sesai, with Joe Jobson later identified as another key participant. A fourth suspect, George Goddard, but we will talk about him in a few minutes. The intruders moved quickly and decisively through the property. There was no hesitation and no attempt to disguise the purpose of the break-in. This was not an opportunistic burglary. It was a planned, targeted raid on a household they believed contained items of exceptional value. As noise traveled upstairs and unfamiliar voices were heard inside the house, the family became aware that their home had been breached and that the threat was already inside with them. The first person to realize something was wrong was Peter Cavendish. Woken by noise downstairs, she left the bedroom to investigate. As she reached the lower part of the house, she was confronted by figures in balaclavas moving quickly through the darkness. The danger was immediate. She turned and ran back upstairs, shouting a warning to her husband as she went. By the time Mark Cavendish tried to respond, it was already too late. Cavendish attempted to activate a panic alarm, but before he could do so, the intruders were in the bedroom. He was dragged from the bed, forced to his feet, and punched repeatedly. One offender locked him into a headlock, controlling his movement, while another produced a large black knife, later described in court as Rambo style. The knife was held against Cavendish's throat. The threats that followed were explicit and immediate. The attackers demanded to know where the watches were and made clear they were willing to use the knife. These threats were issued in front of the couple's children, amplifying the terror of the moment. Throughout the assault, Peter Cavendish focused on protecting her child. She pulled a duvet over their 3-year-old, shielding them from what was happening only feet away, an instinctive attempt to block out the violence unfolding in their own bedroom. The court would later hear that the attack lasted only minutes, but the control exercised by the intruders was total. The family were injured, outnumbered, and trapped, and the offenders were now in complete command of the room. With the family subdued and the bedroom under control, the intruders turned their attention to what they had come for. The primary targets were 2 Richard Mille watches, timepieces of exceptional value. One was valued at approximately £400,000, the other between £300,000 and £350,000. The court heard that both Mark Cavendish and his wife were brand ambassadors for Richard Mille, and the watches had been leased to them as part of that relationship. A fact investigators later described as central to why the family had been targeted. Alongside the watches, the offenders seized mobile phones belonging to both Mark and Peter Cavendish, cutting off their immediate ability to call for help. They also took an empty safe, which Cavendish had been forced to attempt to open during the attack, and a Louis Vuitton suitcase, valued at around £2,200, used to carry stolen items from the property. The raid was swift, but not flawless. The watches themselves were never recovered. By the time the intruders fled, they had taken hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of property in just minutes. But they had also left behind something far more damaging to themselves: physical evidence that would eventually unravel the case. The Cavendish property was equipped with CCTV, and footage recovered from the system showed masked offenders moving around the house, confirming the timing of the raid and the number involved. While faces were concealed, the recordings established clear sequences of movement and helped investigators reconstruct how the attack unfolded from entry to exit. The most significant breakthrough came just outside the home. One of the stolen mobile phones, belonging to Peter Cavendish, was found discarded near the property. Forensic examination quickly turned it into a cornerstone of the case. DNA recovered from the handset was matched to Ali Cisse, directly linking him to the robbery and placing him inside the house during the attack. The phone also unlocked a wider picture. In response, Essex Police launched a dedicated investigation known as Operation Chamber, bringing together specialist officers, forensic analysts, and digital investigators. As the data was mapped and cross-referenced with CCTV, vehicle movements, and mobile phone records, a clear group of suspects emerged. Those identified included Romario Henry, Ali Cisse, Joe Jobson, and George Goddard. Individuals whose roles ranged from direct participation inside the house to wider involvement in the conspiracy. While some were quickly located and arrested, others would attempt to evade police as the case gathered momentum. Romario Henry chose to contest the case. He denied involvement in the raid and stood trial at Chelmsford Crown Court, where prosecutors presented DNA evidence, phone data, and CCTV material. The jury rejected his account, finding him guilty of 2 counts of robbery. Sentencing did not end with prison terms. The court imposed a confiscation order totaling £754,525, reflecting the financial benefit gained from the raid. Additional compensation orders were made in favour of Mark and Peter Cavendish, acknowledging the personal and psychological harm caused. Henry was later sentenced to 15 years imprisonment, with the court concluding he had been directly involved in the violence inside the house. In victim impact statements, the court heard that the robbery had fundamentally changed family life, leaving the Cavendish household living with ongoing fear. The couple said they had even considered selling their home, unable to shake the sense of threat attached to the property. Following the conclusion of the case, Essex Police awarded commendations to officers involved in Operation Chamber, recognizing the scale and complexity of an investigation that combined forensic science, digital analysis, and long-term pursuit of suspects. In contrast, Ali Cisse admitted his role at an earlier stage. He pleaded guilty to 2 counts of robbery. During his arrest, officers recovered further evidence of serious criminality. Loaded firearms were thrown from a window as police executed warrants, leading to additional charges. Ali Cisse was sentenced to 12 years for the robbery, with a further 8 years imposed consecutively for firearms offences. Another defendant, Oludewa Okorosobo, stood trial alongside Henry. The jury ultimately cleared him of all charges, finding insufficient evidence to prove his involvement in the robbery. Attention then turned to Joe Jobson. Identified early in the investigation, Jobson went on the run for around 18 months, avoiding arrest while others faced trial. In June, he finally handed himself in to police. He denied the charges, but following a separate trial was convicted of robbery and later sentenced to 15 years imprisonment, with the judge stating the evidence against him was overwhelming. A 4th suspect, George Goddard, was named during proceedings but remains wanted, with Essex Police continuing efforts to locate him. What do you think about the cases and the sentences? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your take. And if you found this breakdown informative, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next episode of UK crime documentaries.